Let's install a new valve cover and oil catch can from Black Market Performance. This truck is a 2022, and these parts fit most 6.7-liter Cummins engines from 2006 through 2024. To get started with this install, you'll need to get some connectors and a harness off the factory valve cover and out of the way. Next, you can unbolt the oil dipstick tube, then remove the factory upper valve cover, CCV filter, and finally the lower valve cover. There are 6 10mm bolts holding the lower valve cover onto the cylinder head. Remove these 6 bolts carefully to protect the threads in the cylinder head. Once these bolts are removed, you can start to gently pry the valve cover gasket away from the valve cover. This gasket contains injector wiring, and we don't want it lifting from the cylinder head. Here I am removing the CCV drain from the valve cover. There are 2 ports from the valve cover that converge to a Y shape that drain to the engine block just behind the ECM. This Y hose assembly will come out completely. A new oil line will be connected to this fitting on the engine block, which will be running from the bottom of the BMP oil catch can. With the gasket gently separated, you can remove the factory lower valve cover and immediately replace it with the Black Market Performance valve cover. Using the 6 supplied bolts, start bolting the new valve cover to the cylinder head. Pay close attention to the valve cover gasket to make sure it isn't pinched or out of place along the perimeter of the valve cover. Use an alternating pattern to tighten the valve cover down. With the valve cover in place and tightened down, it's time to address the factory crankcase ventilation hose that was routed to the turbo from the factory valve cover. Since this truck will be getting an oil catch can, we no longer need this hose. I'm going to block this inlet with a plug and a cut-down section of the factory hose. Next, it's time for the oil catch can. Using the BMP bracket and hardware, this mounts next to the intake elbow. Crankcase pressure will vent through the 2 ports at the top of the valve cover to the 2 fittings in the catch can. There is also an oil drain fitting at the bottom of the can for oil to drain back to the driver's side of the engine block. Here is the bracket installed next to the intake elbow. Now the can will be installed onto the bracket using 2 bolts and lock washers. Here is the can installed onto the bracket. Now it's time for the hoses running from the valve cover. In this configuration, I used a 7.5-inch piece and a 19-inch piece of hose running from the valve cover to the catch can. Now is a good time to double check that all the fittings have been tightened, all the hoses have been clamped, and the oil drain is connected to the engine block. With those checks done, this install is complete and looking real good. Thanks for watching.